Hi, in this video I'm going to try and show how to cut one of the inbuilt quilt designs within the ScanNCut machine. Somebody contacted me and asked me would I do a video on this showing how to do it on the 12x24 mat. I don't have the 12x24 mat, and the only reason I don't is because I bought one for a previous machine, and 4 years later after selling that machine I've still got the 12x24 mat unwrapped and unused. So when I bought the ScanNCut I decided not to buy it, but I'm going to try and show you how to do it on the regular 12x12 mat. So before I start, there's a few things I need to just clarify. I'm using my regular mat with my regular blade, which will be set at 4 because that's what I use for quilting cotton. My blade pressure is also going to be set at 4, and my cut speed is always set at 5. I don't need to draw the 1/4 inch seam allowance because I've got a machine that does that for that has a setting on that for me already, and I have a 1/4 inch foot, but I am going to draw it in this video just to follow the process through. But I don't have the fabric pens, so I'm using the regular Brother pen. So what I've also done, I've gone into the settings and I've turned my draw pressure down to 1, just so that the ink from the normal pen doesn't come through on my fabric. So just to clarify, I've got my cut speed on 5, I've got my cut pressure on 4, I've got my draw speed on 3 and my draw pressure on 1. And I'm going to say OK. I'm going to go into the patterns, into my quilting section, into this section here. And then the pattern I'm going to choose, I think, is on about page 10 or 11. This one. I'm going to cut it at its default size, which is 8 inches. So I'm going to say OK. And I'm going to cut it in 2 different colours. So I'm going to cut it in like a cream cotton and a pattern cotton. So all these white shapes, these 5 white shapes that you can see on the screen, are going to be cut in my cream fabric. So I'm going to choose the first one and say OK and set. Then I'm going to go to add and choose the next one. Then add again and choose the third one. And then add again. I'm just following what it's prompting me to do on screen. And the last one. And this one needs 2, which I'm assuming it's going to put on my mat. Yes, it does. And that's it for now. And just to clarify, going back into the settings, I'm not a quilter, and normally my seam allowance is set to 3 milli because I'm a paper crafter, and that's what I normally use when I'm doing mats and layers. But I've gone in and I've changed it to a 1/4 inch because that's normally what you use when you're doing patchwork. So this seems to have put the 1/4 inch seam allowance on all my designs for me. I'm going to choose draw now, and then I'm going to start drawing. But I would just say that normally, if you've seen any of my previous videos, you'll know that when I cut fabric, excuse me, I normally use heat and bond on the back. But because I want to use this as some kind of a quilting project, I'm using cotton that's not got any kind of a backing on it at all. What I've done is I've starched it with spray starch 3 times. So literally just a can of starch that I bought in the supermarket, sprayed the back of the fabric, ironed it dry with a very hot dry iron, sprayed it again, ironed it dry, sprayed it again and ironed it dry. So both sets of fabric that you're going to see me draw and cut on in this video have had 3 applications of spray starch. So we'll see how we go. So I'm just going to set it off to draw now. Okay, so that's all drawn now. I don't know if you can see that. And then on the screen it says, do we want to select the next part or finish? Now my original reaction would be to go to select the next part, but I think that's the next part in the patchwork, which is the coloured section, and we've not cut this yet, so I'm going to say finish. Okay, that's right. So because we've only drawn and we've not cut, we have to say finish. If we'd have cut this, I think then we go on to select next part and load up the fabric with the next colour. So this time I'm going to say cut. I'm going to take the pen out and I'm going to put the blade in and I'm going to set it off to cut. So that's all finished cutting. Excuse me. And I'm now going to go to select next part. So what I need to do now is load up my mat with my second lot of fabric and load up my screen with my second set of patterns. So we'll see what happens here. So I'm going to choose this and say OK and set. And I'm going to go to add and choose the next one and set, add again, the next one, and then add the last one. Okay, that's put those on there for me. I'm just going to load my mat up and I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so quickly, I don't know if you can see that, but there are all my shapes all cut out with the seam allowance. With this next set of the pattern, I'm going to do a background scan of my fabric because my fabric is only about 9 inches wide by about 12 inches high. So I want to make sure that these designs will fit on the fabric. So I'm just going to do a quick background scan and I may have to move the patterns around. So I don't know if you can see on screen, but I've moved the patterns around to fit in my piece of fabric. So I'm going to do the same process as I did before and say OK and say draw and draw the shapes. So it's finished drawing. I'm going to take the pen out. I'm going to put the blade back in, but this fabric's slightly heavier than my other one. So I'm going to take my blade up on this one to 5 and I'm going to say finish and cut. Wait for it to process. And that looks as though it's too close. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to move this one up slightly. Although that's not going to work now because I've drawn the seam allowance, but it will be okay for me because I don't need to see the actual drawn line. But obviously for you, if you're relying on the drawn line, once you've drawn it, don't move your shape like I've just done. I'm going to say cut. That looks better for me now, and I'm going to cut. That's all drawn, so I'm going to say finish and unload. Here are all of the cut pieces, so all as I have to do now is try and work out how to sew them all together.